This is Scott Spears, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Scott Spears Now. Today, an interview I've been waiting over a year to do and have gotten in front of this window to do. Because you know what's outside that window out there? Weather. Crazy Ohio weather. Cold this week. We reached a new record low of negative 11 degrees without the wind chill this past week, which puts me very much in the mind of our guest today. He's a legendary New York meteorologist from WNBC, Dr. Frank Field. But Dr. Frank Field's work was not just limited to the weather on WNBC. He also became nationally known as a guest on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. We'll talk about that. Also got involved with the Heimlich maneuver, Dr. Henry Heimlich's famous maneuver to save people's lives. He got very much involved with that, as well as fire safety, and with another guy I like a whole lot, Tom Snyder. So we are going to check in with Dr. Frank Field now, who lives in the sunny, warm area of Florida, and see what he's up to these days. Fun interview I've waited over a year to do. Here we go. Dr. Frank Field. Or as Johnny Carson would say, it's now time for NBC's crack meteorologist, Dr. Frank Field. This is Scott Spears, and today I'm joined by one of the most well-known meteorologists in television history, due in part to his guest stints with Tom Snyder and on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. As Johnny Carson would say himself, I am very glad to say, to be joined by crack meteorologist Dr. Frank Field. Dr. Frank, you haven't changed a bit. How are you doing?
Well, it should probably be NBC's crack meteorologist. So I'm doing fine. I'm living here in the wilds of Boca Raton, Florida, on the ocean. And while I guess most of the country today is at record-breaking lows, we've had record-breaking sort of lows in the 40s and 50s and not in the teens and sub-zero. So this was my best forecast coming down here.
All those years spent in New York, do you miss it?
Well, I miss it for another reason. I miss it because I've got children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren living in Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. But I'm a wise old codger. I'm 90 now, and what I do is say, you want to see Grandpa and great-grandpa, come on down. That was a great commercial. Remember that? Come on down. The guy used to come down to Orange Country.
Frank, you mentioned it there. I was going to bring it up later on in the interview. 90 years old, going to be 91 before too long.
March.
Yeah.
That's the part. Wow.
You look great. What's the secret?
The secret is drink plenty of booze, run around with women, and do things that doctors tell you not to do. The secret is genes. I guess if you're lucky enough to have some decent genes, you'll make it this far. And many of my friends haven't, sadly to say. So I'm glad to be here at this point.
Frank, I want to go to the other end of the spectrum, and I want to talk about your childhood. What were your mom and dad like? What was growing up like?
Well, my parents came to this country as immigrants around 1910, and I grew up in a rather impoverished area, went to the public school systems in Brooklyn, attended public colleges, otherwise we never would have gotten an education. It was all free in those days. And along came World War II and said, you're going overseas. And that's what happened and changed my life. I went overseas. I graduated as a geologist, and the Air Force said, we don't need anybody throwing rocks So we're going to make you into a meteorologist. And I ended up in England during the war, in the European theater, as a meteorologist. And that's where I picked up that trade.
What does a meteorologist do in war?
Well, we were the guys that had to predict the weather over bombing sites, and it was very crude in those days. We were the guys that were involved in the landings when the weather would be best. And we were the guys who also, when the war was ending, had to predict weather in areas we had never seen or been there, to ferry troops from Europe over to Japan. And we were the guys that did weather reconnaissance. It was a very crude way of predicting weather. It was amazing that we made all that work.
What was it about meteorology when they threw you into this that gained your interest?
I had no interest.
None.
I wanted to be a pilot. They looked at my record and said, "You're an A student. You majored in geology." And I majored in geology because I was hoping to travel worldwide and look for oil and do those great things. And I ended up not doing it. But what I ended up doing was being shuffled into the school system that the Army had, attended MIT, Chinook Field Air Force, and ended up then at Homestead Air Force Base as an instructor to pilots who had to learn meteorology, and then was shipped overseas. It was not what I wanted to do, it was what the Army and the Air Corps at that time wanted to do. And there I was with a profession that I never thought I would ever use.
Being that it's not what you wanted to do, something had to grasp your mind in it to keep your interest. What was it about it?
I was thrown helter-skelter back into it. I really ended up as an eye doctor, and I was at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And along came the general manager of our station in New York City, WNBC. And he was an Oklahoman who owned a couple of stations. And when he came to New York, he said, "I want a real meteorologist on the air doing the weather." Because what we had were Miss Americas and cartoonists, and weather wasn't a serious thing in those days. It was a little black and white screen about, oh, maybe that big, little black and white screen. And so he said, "Find me a meteorologist." And the station manager said, "Where in the devil will I find a meteorologist?" And somebody said, "There's a guy who used to work for the Weather Bureau of New York for a number of years, and he's now at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. He's a real meteorologist." So they called me, and they said, "Would you come down and do the weather report for us on Saturday at 6 o'clock? And I said, "Well, I'm pretty busy. I'm at a medical school, and I have my work here." And they said, "Well, it's for 5 minutes on the air, and you get $75. And I thought, wow, $75. I was getting under the GI Bill in those days, $110 for an entire month, and here I was going to get $75 for just 5 minutes appearance on some kind of a TV station in the middle of Manhattan, and it was Radio City, and that's where I ended up, in Radio City on Saturday nights, picking up $75 to do a weather report, which was really nothing spectacular to do. It was a simple thing. And by the way, we were sponsored, if I remember correctly, by Bell Telephone. Weather 61212 was the number to call if you want a weather forecast. So that's how I got thrown into it. It was the money. $75 for 5 minutes of work on a Saturday night. That bought me within 6 months a brand new car. And that's how I ended up on television.
When you were called down to do this with no training in broadcasting and really not a whole lot, certainly preparing a meteorology forecast for television, what did you go down there thinking you were going to do?
I had no idea. But I was the guy that was hired initially to teach the weather girls, the ukulele players, and the cartoonists which way the wind blows around the high pressure, around the low pressure, very basic stuff. Not many people had television sets. I mean, we're talking of the pre-color, black and white, little 6 by 10-inch screens, if they were that big, and the television going off the air at 11 o'clock and then later on at 12 o'clock. This was a pioneering period. So I was sort of a weather pioneer in New York City, the only legitimate guy who had some background training and college training in meteorology. And it was a 13-week contract, which made me very happy. And I thought, well, at the end of 13 weeks, I made a couple of bucks. But then at the end of 13 weeks, they said, we're going to re-sign you for another 13 weeks. But this time, we're also going to do a weather report Sunday night, for which you will be paid another $75. So $150 to work for 10 minutes on a weekend back in the 50s was a huge fortune. I mean, you could buy gasoline. A gallon of gasoline was like 18 cents. I mean, your rent was you could rent a house or an apartment for literally 50, 60 bucks a month. So I was really doing well, and I was waiting for the bubble to burst at some point and them say, well, we've had enough of you, Frank, get lost, which is what happens in television, as you know, and in radio. But it kept going and kept going, and I ended up doing 50 years of this stuff, happily having the greatest time of my life, because I was doing more than the weather. I was also the science editor at NBC, then I went to CBS, and then I went to Fox, as talent usually does. They jump from station to station for some reason or other, maybe problems with management, maybe more money. And I've had 50 fantastic years doing something that I would pay them to do.
Frank, when you went on air, looking back at it now, what edge do you think you had over the weather girls and the clowns being a trained meteorologist?
Well, I had the know-how. Those talents had no background, and in the event of the reason I remember the name of the fellow, Buddy Sugg, was the guy who owned the stations in Oklahoma, who insisted. He became head of the O&Os, came to New York, and he insisted on getting a genuine, real, bona fide meteorologist, because in Oklahoma and in the Southwest, tornadoes and storms were highly important. In New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, nobody saw the sky, so it didn't matter. And so my advantage was that I had a fairly good background and it was easy. And after a while, I changed over into doing science pieces because just doing the weather was totally boring at times. Same old pattern day after day in the summer, maybe in the winter a little more exciting with big storms. But it was really an era in which we could all pioneer, whether we did weather, whether we did health and science, or whether we were reporters. And remember, we changed, not a short while later, into live television. No, first was the color idea. Color suddenly came in, and the Peacock had the fans spreading out in bright color. And then after that came a period or an era of live television, which blew us away. Imagine, I didn't have to go out and shoot a film and then come back and edit the film, produce the film, edit the film, cut the film, put together a package. I could do it live. And that was the era that opened up television in a great way. But having the background, no matter what it is, whether it's having a background in being a movie critic or being a book critic or being an anchorman or a reporter, we were picking in those days those who had that background. You couldn't just put people on the air to fake it.
You're exactly right. You say you started out $75 a pop in the 1950s. In 1960, you rode over to the big WNBC. How did that happen?
How did I get over there and get the job?
Yeah.
Well, I was at the medical school one day, and they called me up and said, our key weatherman of the 6 o'clock and the 11 o'clock weatherman, a fellow named Tex Antoine, he quit. He's going to ABC to make a lot more money, and we need somebody immediately. And I said, well, I have to think about it. And they said, no, you don't have to think about it. What you have to do is tell us now, do you want his job? And I said, but I'm at a medical school. And they said, we don't care where you are. If you don't take it, we're going to bring someone in from California that might be our end run. And I went home and I was up all night thinking about it. And the next day I told Mrs. Field, let's take a shot at this. It'll be 13 weeks, and then obviously they're going to fire me. And that's how it started. It was simply serendipity. If Mr. Antoine had not quit, I might still be up at the medical school.
During this time, I would say the time at WNBC certainly had to be, in my opinion, the great part of your career. You started this relationship with Johnny Carson. How did this happen?
Well, NBC was the key station and the key network, and I fell into it. And I managed to stay going, I thought, pretty well for the first year and the second year. And then, for whatever reason, Johnny Carson, at the time, would tape his program at around 5 o'clock. And it was an hour and a half, and then we would follow at 6:30 with the local news in the city. And one day, one of the cameramen came down and said, hey, Frank, what's Johnny Carson got in for you? Why does he like you? And I said, I don't even know him. I love him. I try to rush home to watch him do his monologue at 11 o'clock, at 11:30, right after the 11 o'clock news on which I was performing. And I said, I don't even know. Why do you say that? And he said, well, he made some funny remark about you being on the roof dancing in an Indian outfit to wah, 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 doing the weather or something. And I said, no, he didn't. You just put me on. He said, no. So when he finished the news that day, at 11:30, I went directly to my office, and I didn't rush home as I usually do, put on the TV set, and sure enough, Johnny Carson made some derogatory remark and called me the crack meteorologist. We said that we'd have a flood of lava in the harbor, or whatever. I forget what it was at that time. But once he started making that crack, I sat there and wondered, and I was a little upset. I said, why is he picking on me? Not realizing that this was a gold mine. He was putting me on the network, national, mentioning my name. And so he started, and I said, I'm going to keep quiet. And the very next week, he brought it up again. And one of the cameramen who came down after shooting the Tonight Show, did the news show, came down and said, well, he did it to you again. And I said, what did he say this time? He said, you were the lookout at Pearl Harbor. That was your previous job, which got a tremendous laugh from the audience as I watched it. And at the time, I said, you know what? He's turning me into a second banana, and I got to get back at him. And what I did was, after he did that for several weeks, I became bombastic, what was that fellow's name? Bushkin, his lawyer, or Ed being the drunk, or I became one of his creatures. And every time he'd get on and say, well, NBC's crack meteorologist predicted something or other that was hilarious. I thought, I got to get back at him. So in those days, you must appreciate, there was no humor in the news. Walter Cronkite could not appear on a Carson show. Douglas Edwards couldn't appear on a Carson show because NBC, or Huntley and Brinkley couldn't appear on a Carson show because they were newsmen. And NBC said to me, you're a newsman and you cannot appear on the Carson show. And I said, of course not. And one day I get a call from Ed DeCordova, I think. DeCordova was his name, wasn't it? You're a fan of...
Yeah, he was the producer.
Yeah, he was the producer. He called and said the catcher for the St. Louis Browns, he did sports on the air at Giardella or...
Garagiola.
Garagiola, you got it. Mike, how old are you?
33.
You should know about them. Listen, there are kids out there that come up and they don't know who Johnny Carson is or or any of the other old timers. I'm surprised. Well, at any rate, they said he's not showing up, and we want you to come on the broadcast. And I did, and they dumped water on me, and I have a sense of humor, and I took it. And after that, I became the butt of Johnny's joke, and we became pretty good friends.
Friday from New York, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. This is Ed McMahon along with Doc Severinsen, the NBC Orchestra, inviting you to join Johnny and his guests, Marlon Brando, John Davidson, actress Colleen Moore, Linda Ronstadt of the Stone Ponies, NBC's crack meteorologist Dr. Frank Field, and special guest, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy's former cook, Anna Marie Hustay.
No, we have a great show tonight. Probably the finest actor in the business. Mr. Marlon Brando is with us tonight. We have great-looking boy and a fine singer, John Davidson, is aboard. A lady who made many, many motion pictures, is not in pictures now, but is going to talk about some great days in Hollywood. Miss Colleen Moore. We have Linda Ronstadt with the Stone Ponies. They're more or less from California. I think this is one of the first times they've played back east. Is it not? Staff?
Yes,
And I mentioned our trick-or-treat weatherman. Dr. Field will be here as soon as he gets out of his headdress. You ever seen those antlers teeth he wears with a goat thing and the skin up on the roof? What is he now? He's got a low-pressure system right between his ears. And a big front moving in. So, anyway, hey, I'm dynamite. Hey, I'm a hit. Well, stay where you are. We're over there. This is a very special friend of mine. You've heard me mention him on this show before. His weather show here in New York is local, although Dr. Field has done shows on the network. If you haven't seen his show, we'll give you a short preview of what he does to me occasionally on his weather report on Channel 4 in New York occasionally. Watch.
Winds are out of the north at 11, but they are gusting up to about 20 miles an hour. Now, our winds will remain out of the north through tonight, and then tomorrow they should become variable, and they should become light onshore along the coast. That means temperatures climbing generally into the 60s. I'll be back with our forecast for tomorrow and the outlook for Thursday right after this brief message.
All righty, here. Here he is, NBC's crack meteorologist, Dr. Frank Field.
Not the only one who was loosened up by Johnny Carson. They'll pay their respects, thousands of them, and they're all here, and here are just a few.
What I didn't know, Frank, and I think what a lot of people don't know, is, this is going to sound silly, how funny he is. I had just seen him on The Tonight Show until we started doing our profile for 60 Minutes, and we followed him to Las Vegas. And before a Monday night audience, for an hour and a half, he turned out to be one of the funniest stand-up comedians I had ever seen.
I have been told there will be some surprises tonight with Fred Silverman on the dais. Some kind of surprise conversation between John and Fred. What it is, I don't know. But there have been rumors that John will star in a revival of Supertrain.
I think I fought him in Cleveland, and I think I licked him, but he's a hell of a nice guy.
I don't need any meals or work. And I'm here tonight, and I traveled up from Georgia just to MC this dinner for him, and this is quite a job tonight, but it's a labor of love, I tell you that.
How you doing?
Are you being killed to death here?
With kindness.
With kindness.
How are you?
It's wonderful. I've got a little piece we're going to run on the air tonight, and you've doused me with some water.
Well, I hope it's better than your weather forecast.
He was a lovely guy, and with me, he was a prince. I mean, he would send me notes every now and again, or a book, or a note like there was a law back 1700 that when a seer predicted a weather report for the king and it was wrong, they'd behead him. And he'd say, and in the note he'd say, I wish they'd bring that law back. So it was a great time, and he just promoted the living heck out of me and made me into and then it finally got to the point where he asked me during one summer when Ed was going on vacation, the Cordova asked if I could fill in for Ed just to be a sidekick. And of course, I couldn't because the president of NBC, Reuben Frank, who was the president of News, said, "No way." So I lost my chance to play Ed McMahon.
When he was off camera, what was he like? The stories are there, shy.
He was a very sweet, shy, lovely guy if he liked you. I don't know what he was like to other people. But I remember sitting in Patsy's restaurant one night with my wife. We had gone to a movie on a weekend, and we were walking back, and we stopped in at this Patsy's restaurant, which is an Italian restaurant, I think on 48th, 49th. And we went in there, and I was wearing a turtleneck sweater, and Patsy came over to me and said, "You need a jacket. You have to have a jacket. Let me get you one of the jackets." In the middle of dinner, somebody came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder, and I thought, oh, somebody wants an autograph or something. And I turned around, and it was Johnny Carson. And he said, "What's the matter, kid? Can't you afford to buy a suit?" But he sent me material. He was just with me for whatever it is. I guess he felt that I was a straight-laced guy with a sense of humor and would make a great second banana. And when I went on this program, it was absolute fun. No preparation, just right along, and he let you get all the laughs, and that was just a great period. And when I look back, the people I appeared with on there, it was astonishing that Frank Field, did this when I look back. So he was really very instrumental in being helpful, because they couldn't fire me anymore. I was a creature of Johnny Carson's, and if he said, "I want this" or "I want that," they would do it in those days. And when they said, "You can't go on the show," he said, "Yes, he will, and I will use him once a year from now on, but I have that right," and he did, which upset the news people, but I had all the fun.
Do you have a favorite appearance in those years?
Well, yeah, I thought that the buckets of water that I took really, it was all over. It was in the newspapers. It was spread all over the place. It was just an outstanding, eye-catching event. And it was sent all over. I got cards and letters from people who said they always thought that NBC's crack meteorologist, Dr. Frank Field, was a figment of Johnny's imagination. They didn't know there was a real Frank Field on television in Midtown in New York City.
Mm. When we were setting this in...
Oh, I'll tell you, I want to interrupt you. For example, he almost got me fired. One night, he and McMahon and a group from the Tonight Show were up in the Rainbow Room in the same building where our studios are. And suddenly, while I'm doing the 11 o'clock weather, very serious, behind me comes a figure that starts poking me with an umbrella, and I turn, and it's Johnny Carson, and we're on the air. It was, I thought, a disaster. I'm fired. There goes my career. He stuck the umbrella behind his back and jabbed me in the butt and started dancing and singing in the rain, and I'm ignoring him, trying to ignore him to do the weather, which was one of the great minutes in my 50-year career, trying to do the weather with Carson behind me, egging me and pushing me around.
When we talked the other night, Frank, to set this interview up, we talked about one of my favorites, and it's actually there's a memory, and I'm going to share it now with this gentleman, Tom Snyder, who was just a class act, hosted the Tomorrow Show, for those people who don't know, the Late Late Show, and I was sharing with you the other night, the memory that I have was, I think he was at CBS at the time, and there were two postmen up on a roof in New York. And the deal was they were going to stay up there in this cold chill for so many hours, and if they did, Tom would give them a six-pack of beer. And he had you present the beer up there.
He was on cable then.
Was it cable?
Yeah, he was on cable, it was one of the cable stations, which one was it? I don't remember.
I think he was on CNBC.
CNBC, that was it. you're right. He was on CNBC. And while he was there, too, we were fast friends. Tom was, to me, was just literally my son. I mean, I just loved him. And we had a great rapport. But he called me one night on a Thursday, I think it was. The Weather Bureau had, and I was off that week, the Weather Bureau had predicted a major snowstorm striking New York with maybe a foot or more of snow. And Tom called me and said, I'm sending a limo down to you. I want you up here at 10 o'clock. We're going to put you in a parking lot right outside the building so that you can tell us when the first flakes are coming down. I said, okay. Well, I wouldn't turn it down for anything in the world. And as a matter of fact, when I celebrated an anniversary, I think it was, we were married, my wife and I were married for something like 35 years, 40 years at the time. We had a surprise, the kids had a surprise party for us, and somehow we found out about it. And by then he had left for California and was working in California. He actually flew cross country that day with a case of champagne and showed up at my home, totally uninvited. It was a personal family thing, and I was stunned. And he said, you think I would have missed this? And I mean, that relationship was much closer than the one I had with Carson. I mean, he was a very dear friend. And we had the greatest time together on the news. People were turning on the news just to see him bash me and me bash him. We had literally every studio stagehand come down at 6 o'clock to sit in our studio to watch the news because they never knew what Tom was going to do to me or I was going to do to Tom. I remember one night he came behind the rear projection screen that I use for the weather, and as I turned to do the weather, he just pulled it down and he was standing behind it. And he said, how are you going to do the weather now, buddy? And I had to fake the weather for a while. Another night, he came up to me, and knowing Tom and his temperament, the stage manager said, hey, Tom, they're running short on time. You've got to throw it to Frank right away, no fooling around. You don't say that to Tom Snyder. So when they came out of the news package, Tom said, and now here we are with NBC's crack meteorologist, the host of Not for Women Only, a man who stays up all night to watch your weather. And he went on, and now the stage manager is holding up 5 seconds, 4 seconds, and at 3 seconds to go, he says, and now here's Frank. And I said, good weather tonight, bing, off he went off the air. And he went, ho, 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 and the whole studio went on the floor, and the news director turned white, red, and came down screaming, you're ruining the show. But that was Tom Snyder.
Absolutely.
Or else I can think of a million events. Or else I did a program on losing weight, and we had a scale in the studio, and I had to get on and weigh myself. And he said, now here is NBC's, here's Francois. He called me Francois to get on and weigh himself, and I got on a scale, and the handle kept going up to 200, 300, 400. He put his foot on the scale behind me and was pressing down. But this is the kind of camaraderie we had. And he was just a great guy, a terrific guy. And one of the highlights of working with him was just being there with him, playing with him, or going up to his office and playing chess and closing his window because he was smoking. I rather opening his window in the middle of the winter because he was smoking, and I couldn't stand the smoke. And he'd run over after every move, close the window. I'd make a move and go over and open the window. But Tom, he was a genius, one of the few geniuses in television, and born for it.
Frank, when Tom left CBS in '98, didn't see him again, and sadly passed away, I think, in 2007. But for a good 10 years, didn't hear or see from Tom. What was he doing?
He was playing with his trains. He was writing. He kept himself pretty busy. But it was to me, television and radio just lost one of the greats. He really should have been way at the top. He was in what he did, but sadly, he never got the real opportunity. You know, in that business, like with my case, I never thought of television as a job. It was totally out of my mind. It just came along, and with Tom, it was his life. And the breaks just didn't come along because the wrong manager was in the wrong business at the wrong time, that kind of thing. But he really was one of the great talents in the 50 years that I worked. He and Frank McGee is another one who's been forgotten, but one of the great talents too.
I would agree with you 100%. You know, Frank, when I was doing some preparation for this interview earlier on today, I came across 1974. You were the first to do a broadcast a surgery on television.
We had gone to live cameras, which was brand new. We were the only ones, I guess, in New York. The camera must have weighed a ton. The cameraman was a 6'4" giant who could lug it around. And the easiest way to do a live remote, and know you're going to get it, because it took a lot of time to set up the wireless systems and the shield, the dishes, and so on. It's not like today where you can rush to a scene and just with a live camera and bingo, you got it there. We did the first live shots in New York City, and that was really something that was unreal to us. And doing a health and science report was probably the easiest live shot to do because you had lots of time to prepare for it within the studio. If you were on the 8th floor of the, let's say, the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, you could set up a dish outside the window, run it up to the roof, and do all these incredible things. And we were the first ones to begin to do live shots. So we were pioneering in those days. You know, we'd gone from black and white to color, and now live television, which today is overly done. I mean, we know it's live. You see the guy out there, and yet the anchor will say, "Let's go to Joe Blow live," and Joe Blow answers, "Well, of course he's not dead." They're going to him live, and he says, "Here I am live at so-and-so, and back to you live from so-and-so," and that was Joe Blow live. It should be put away, put to bed. We know they're live. They're not dead at the other end. But in those days, live and color were huge breakthroughs. And we did the first live shots, and we did the live surgery of a kidney transplant, which took an hour and a half, and got NBC 5,000 donor cards from people who signed up to donate their kidneys. It was really a first in television.
Absolutely. Frank, after all these the first surgery, live television, Tom Snyder, Johnny Carson, well over 20 years at WNBC, you made the jump to WCBS. Why'd you do that?
Well, I really spent 25 years at NBC, and then the management changed. And as in any business, sometimes management doesn't get along with talent. And I decided that I'd just go back to the medical school. And when I told the NBC that I could not work with management because they were not doing what I felt they should be doing, and they were asking me to do silly things, I said, "I'm not going to belittle this. I'm not going to lower myself. Goodbye." And CBS heard something about that, came and said, "Is this true?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm not interested in doing song and dance. I'm a serious guy, and I've got a sense of humor, but I also want to do things that are uplifting. I want to do programs that raise people to a higher level." I had spent 10 years at NBC doing half-hour Sunday morning programs with the top doctors in the world, having them do show and tell on health. Before cataract surgery became what it is today, I had the young doctor who developed it. I had the woman who got the Nobel Award for developing radioimmunoassay testing which is what all DNA and all that is about today, genetics. And that was what interested me. Doing a 2 or 3 minute weather report was fun, but it was not as much fun as doing what I really did. So there was a disagreement, and I said goodbye and ended up at CBS for 15 years because they wanted what I was offering.
15 years at CBS, 15 great years, and then again,
Yeah.
another change happened. What happened there?
Well, I wanted to cut back and, because I told my wife when I hit 50 or 60, I'm going to cut back and stop working this hard because I began working when I was the early days at NBC. I'd get up and do a piece on the Today Show, run down, jump into a car, rush up to a hospital or some facility, shoot a medical report, rush back, do the 5 o'clock. We had the first 5 o'clock fun type news show in New York, and I do that, and then I would do the 6, and then I would do the 11. And on some days I could not make it home. I would just check into a hotel up the block and be back for the Today Show or Not for Women Only. It was a horrendous schedule. I couldn't keep up with it. But it was the greatest thing, the greatest joy I've had, working with Lynn Redgrave on Not for Women Only after Barbara Walters left. I mean, these things were thrown at me. I couldn't refuse them. It was just, you were getting paid for having fun. It's like a baseball fan getting paid to come to the stadium to maybe handle a couple of bats and give it to the players. I mean, this doesn't come along very often. I was just one lucky dude.
You have this great voice, this great knowledge, great visibility in New York, certainly even across the country. Why did you finally decide to hang it up altogether?
Well, when I hit 70 and 75, I said, that's it. I thought that it was not as much fun, and I wasn't doing as much as I wanted to or where I wanted to. I want to do the things that I'm doing now, fire safety for children. I've developed this series on fire safety. I did a series at CBS back in '84 that won 6 Emmys, and that was purchased by several companies. Let's say it was let's see now who bought it in those days. It was the smoke manufacturer, the guys that make the smoke detectors, had McDonald's bought the rights and were distributing this fire safety series that we did. And I fell into that because that's what's needed in this country. You want to save children's lives. It was like the Heimlich maneuver. I mean, the Heimlich comes from your state. I did a half-hour Sunday morning program with him on a technique that he developed for people who had esophageal cancer. And 3 or 4 years later, he called and said, I got a great technique for saving people's lives. You squeeze them, and he demonstrated it to me. And I said, okay, we'll do it. And we did it on the air and plugged it for 8 years until it became the tool that's used nowadays. These are the things that I had an interest in. It wasn't money anymore. It was just in what I did and what I could do. And so I figured I'm going to hang it up. There comes a time you gotta get off the stage, let somebody else do it. And the guy that, by the way, took over my slot at NBC, I see him frequently on television now. His name is Al Roker.
Not doing too bad.
No, I mean, there's room for everybody. When you got to get off the stage, that's what you do.
Do you miss it?
I miss it, but I don't think I could handle it. I couldn't do at my age these 20 hours spots for 2 or 3 days. When you go into a crisis mode on a storm for the weather, which they used me for, I used to get out there on the street and try to do live reports in 15 inches of snow and come back and catch the flu and get sick. It's not for us oldsters, let's put it that way. And I think there's lots of room for young people to do that kind of thing. Unfortunately, the economics now seem to prevent that. It's all cut and dried now, and certain patterns you follow, you can't innovate. You don't see anything new. Everybody's following everybody else. In those days, I was the first science reporter, which meant when I was at NBC, CBS said, holy mackerel, we got to get a science reporter. They're killing us. So they hired a fellow named Earl Ubell, who was a writer at one of the newspapers, and he became the science reporter. And then another station hired a science reporter. So we were the pioneers in a sense. We were the pioneers. I was the first one to use radar. There's no such thing available. The lucky thing was the Weather Bureau moved into Rockefeller Center and put its dome on top of us so we could run a line down and sneak it in. So we were the first radar people. Then we were the first satellite people. And then on the space shots, during the years that we went to the moon, they needed somebody to explain, when you throw something up, why doesn't it fall down? And they didn't have many newsmen who understood science. And those were long hours, you know, you're up all day and all night while the astronauts are up there. And at an early age, you can do all that. But at my age, I'd be sleeping at the desk.
Frank, I've had this argument with several people, and you're the person to have it with because I'll take your answer as definitive.
You want to argue with me?
Yeah, let's argue right now.
Okay.
Here's the thing. You said it there. When the reporters go out in the hurricanes and the snowstorms, and they're standing out there and with the microphone and the lights on them, and I understand television is seeing, and it's pictures, I get that. But what would be wrong with shooting the camera now? The cameras are on top of the buildings. Why does the weatherman have to be out there with his trench coat blowing around and his hair blowing all over and the microphone and the umbrella blowing away to know how bad it is outside?
I have no idea. I don't know why they do that. You've got a cable system, a 24-hour cable system, the Weather Channel, that feeds you weather constantly. And I tell you what's interesting about the Weather Channel. They forgot what they're there for. That's 24-hour weather reporting, and now they're putting on documentaries and educational things. It's a strange twist. You know, it really depends on who's running the station. If you get a manager of a station or a president of a station who says, I believe in pretty girls. That's what draws people, and that's what I want to do, the news or the weather. That's what you get. And sometimes you get managers who are very serious about what they want to present to the public, and that's what you'll get. And of course, the news programs that I used to work with were really news programs, and were dictated by news people and read by news people, and had to delve into that area, be as part of that as it was a realistic thing. You hired reporters from newspapers who could write, who could investigate, who could do things properly. And today you hire pretty girls and pretty men, nothing wrong with being pretty girls and pretty men, but who have graduated with communication degrees and have no experience. I mean, I had an incident late in my career where we had a reporter standing at the Verrazano Bridge, turn to a cameraman and say to him, "Where does this bridge go?" He just did a report, and he had no idea where the damn bridge went. But he was a good-looking, deep-voiced guy who could really sell, and that's what the management wanted. Well, the guy with the big ears and the bent nose, who was brilliant in writing, and he was not hired. So it's part of the game.
He would have known where the bridge went.
I wouldn't know where it went. It went to the other side.
Exactly. Frank, I want to look back here to the Heimlich maneuver because I just received word actually today that Dr. Heimlich's releasing his life memoir. Going to be a big. No, he's going to release it next month. But I learned of it today.
Oh.
Going to be a big book party down in Cincinnati next month, February.
Would you call him up and ask him if he remembers Dr. Frank Field?
I will do that.
Because it shows you how life works. I did the Heimlich maneuver, promoted the hell out of it in New York. It grew after 8 years, and I had fights with the Red Cross about its efficacy. They said you're going to break people's ribs, and it was all kinds of a hassle. And also, even the news director said, for God's sake, Frank, you've done 7 reports on the Heimlich maneuver in 2 weeks. And I said, yeah, because people, when they're saved by the Heimlich, call me and say, I saved my baby with what I saw you do. And I want a crew to get out there and shoot that, and I did, and put it on. Well, why don't you do something about the common cold? Well, I said, no, I'll do what I want to. I'm the science editor. So it was provocative, and 15 years after the Heimlich maneuver became big time, the sportscaster Warner Wolf saved my life. We were sitting in a restaurant. I choked on a piece of steak. I was going to die right there, and Warner got up, grabbed me, did exactly what he had to do, and pop, out came a piece of meat, and I went back to work at 11 o'clock, in between 6 and 11.
Now there's a story.
Yeah, it made the newspapers. We had Warner Wolf posing with me, saving me with the Heimlich, and Ed Koch, the mayor of New York, was saved with the Heimlich, and when he was interviewed, he said, thank God so-and-so saw Frank Field on the air demonstrating it the other day, or I'd be dead. So this is a wonderful occasion. That's the kind of thing that really made you want to get up in the morning and go to work. But that doesn't happen anymore. I mean,
unfortunately,
it's a business now, and you can't spend time wasting time a day or two on a deep report or something. It's got to be instant television, and more often than not, it's a facade.
Frank, to this day, he's still fighting the Red Cross and other organizations that want to denounce the Heimlich maneuver, that you can hurt people with it. Why is it the best way?
The Heimlich?
Yes.
It works. It's that simple. The complaint in the early days was, and I agreed with him, was that it had not been proven. And I said at the time to Henry, I can't put you on the air to describe this unless you get it published in a legitimate medical journal. And he did. It was published in the AMA journal. And when he did, I was able to introduce him on the air at the 5 o'clock news program, which was very light. I had to produce a health package 2 or 3 times a week on that program. And I brought Henry Heimlich in, and we did the demonstration. And then I said, based on the article, which was accepted in JAMA, you say that you can save lives with this procedure. How do you do it? He went around and he demonstrated it on me and then on the anchorman, and we said goodbye. And 2 days later, I got a call from the executive of a fuel oil company in Brooklyn, who said, my God, I saved my brother at the Brooklyn Club this afternoon. He was having a steak sandwich. He started to choke. I remember what you showed us the other night with that Dr. Heimlich, he mispronounced his name, and he said, I saved my brother's life. I would like to send a $10,000 check to Dr. Heimlich. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, I'll tell you his address only if you'll let me come and shoot the story of you saving your brother at the club and demonstrating it. And he said, well, it's a very posh place. We can't do it at lunch because it's pretty busy. I said, well, we'll come over at 10 o'clock before the club opens up. All we need is a table in the corner. And we did it. And we put it on the air. And this kept going. We had at least 300 saves in the first year. 300 people were saved just by squeezing kid in the back of a car, swallowed a lollipop and was choking. The mother pulled off the highway screaming, opened the door, grabbed the kid, remember what she saw, pushed him, and pop, out came the lollipop. So it was, you don't need science and double-blind studies and all kinds of medical studies to prove something like that when it happens. It's like saying, let's jump 400 people off the roof to see how many survive. Well, none of them are going to survive off the top of the Empire State Building. And here's a case where we were saving hundreds, and by the end of the year, close to 1,000 lives that we documented. So That was a battle because the medical doctor, the orthopedic kept saying, you're going to break people's ribs. The Red Cross kept saying, you got to hit them on the back 4 times sharply and then do CPR. And they ignored it. They absolutely ignored it. But we prevailed, but it took 7 years.
Dr. Frank, I want to ask you this. For the same reason you did it back then, I want to do it now. We can't do a demonstration here because of camera angles, but how do you do the Heimlich maneuver? If somebody's watching...
I'm not going to tell you. You should know it by now.
Well, I know it. I know it, but I want others to know it.
You need a simple diagram. What you do is you just you put your arms around the midsection of the person who's facing away from you. You make fist, hold on to a fist, squeeze into the diaphragm, not the chest, down below the belly button. Now, there's lots of air that's in your lungs. The object that Heimlich found was if you press sharply into the midsection, it's like a champagne bottle. You're releasing the cork at the top. The air has to get out. It can't go down. It's got to go up. So your lungs are more or less forced to compress the air, and whatever is stuck in that lung shoots right out. In my case, it shot right across the room. I mean, I didn't believe the velocity with water is a very strong man that lifts weights. That piece of roast beef went 10, 15 feet across the room.
It's a great story, and thank goodness it saved your life and lots of other lives. And
hey, I wouldn't have made it to 91.
That's right. And you know what? We wouldn't have gotten to this part of the interview, and maybe the most, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but most important part of your life now, fire safety.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
Now, we have a problem in this country. People ignore, for 40 years we've been promoting smoke detectors, right?
Yes.
And today we're still saying there was no smoke detector, there was no battery. That tells you that people are not concerned about fire safety and don't know the danger of fire safety and couldn't care less about fire safety. And if they're in a high-rise or a home, they have no idea how to get out if there's a fire because they don't know the danger of fire. They've never been taught that. A fire, the very basic elements that people just don't understand. They don't understand that if you're in a fire, this room that I'm sitting in, within 2 minutes, could be so black that I couldn't see but the hands in front of my face. I'd never get out of it. It's so fast that if you start looking for your keys, your wallet, and other things, or go to the phone, you're never going to get out. Speed is of the utmost. They don't know that if you go to sleep, your nose goes to sleep too. Your sense of smell is gone. You're not going to smell smoke in a fire, and if you don't have a smoke alarm or something that will awaken you, you're going to die. It's as simple as that. So there are 5 basic things really that you should know, and no one's teaching that. What we teach in the schools today is stop, drop, and roll, and that's the end of it. Everybody I ever talked to, all the baby boomers, my kids, my grandchildren, learn stop, drop, and roll. And stop, drop, and roll is rarely ever used and is rarely ever effective. It's just something that somebody threw in that sounds good. It's a mantra, some sort of catchy phrase that's caught on. And firefighters have been teaching this for the last 50 years. In 1985 is when I did the other program. So we're talking about 30 years later, nothing has changed in fire safety education. You still give the kids plastic helmets, you still teach them stop, drop, and roll, but 90% of the homes with children in this country have never had a fire drill at home. And when you ask a parent, haven't you ever had a fire drill at home? Your smoke detector goes off. Your kids have to know where to move, how to move, and how quickly to get out. And their response is, oh no, they learn about that in school. They have fire drills in school. Well, fires don't happen in school. They happen in the homes. And so it's been an ingrained disaster. And for many years, this country has had the worst fire record in the world. And I started promoting this years ago, and I'm still fighting the fight. We're finally getting to a point now where every state marshal in this country is going to introduce this Fire Is program. It's 5 modules TV that parents must sit down with children and watch on their home computer or their local TV station or a public station, and they have to watch the 5 episodes to learn the danger of fire, and this way change the culture. My generation is gone. Most of the elderly have no idea what to do about a fire. And the worst track record in this country is the dangers with children and with the elderly. And we have to change that, because we have to change it where people are, families, fathers and mothers cannot teach children fire safety because they themselves don't know what to do. So it's been a vicious cycle, and I forgot how important, I bet if I had a bully pulpit and I were on NBC or CNN doing a series like this, we'd have made progress. But I gave up too soon. I should have worked till I was 100.
Well, you're not done yet. You're not done yet. And it's very important that you say that, and certainly I think everybody should be encouraged to watch this series and know these things, and I know it's more than we could give here, but Dr. Frank, for the people watching this show...
Well, didn't I give you the website we have in New Jersey?
Give us the
address.
Why
don't you give us the website? You can put it up on your machine there. It's njfiresafety.com. And what we have are the 5 lessons on there. It's all free. Any fire station in the country can pick it up. They can download it. They can use it. It's 5 specific lessons. And it has Stormfield, my son, on there, Allison Field. The camera work was done for free. Everything was done for free. And the distribution of this was made possible by the New Jersey Homeland Security and MetLife. That was way back before we finished the series. So we're trying to get it out, and in the past year and a half, I believe we've had 30,000 families that have taken the course of 5 lessons. The idea behind it is this: we don't get involved with the school, take time from the school. We simply tell the school that any middle school class, every middle school class student has to go online or watch the TV at the school, wherever it's placed, the video, watch it 1 per month for 5 months. And they've learned more than stop, drop, and roll. They've now got a foundation ahead when they go off to college to prevent dorm fires, to understand what a fire really is, because right now, nobody understands it.
If we take stop, drop, and roll out of it, because that is the catchy...
No, this stop, drop, and roll is okay. If you're dealing with tiny children, but don't make that the end all. You can't stop at that point. That's what every school, and practically every school in this country, stops with stop, drop, and roll. There's nothing in middle school. Did you have anything in middle school?
I did not, and that's why
Did you have anything in high school?
Nothing beyond that.
How about college?
No.
Okay. It speaks for itself.
So the...
No, but it hasn't gotten past that barrier. The assumption is that once you know stop, drop, and roll, and you tell children don't play with matches, that's the end of it. There's no education there. It is not fire safety education.
So I am going to put the website up there, but that being said, for people who are watching this, what, and I know it's hard to pick, but what happens if there is a fire? What should you do?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, the home. If you're in a high rise, if you're in a low rise, if you're in a private home, you should have an escape plan. Without an escape plan, you're not going to make it. Now, take people, for example, there was a fire back in the 80s where Lionel Hampton, the famous xylophone player, his apartment caught fire, and his butler wheeled him out of the apartment. He was on the 27th floor, I believe it was, and the description of the fire reads like every lesson that was broken. People on the 50th or 60th floor were racing down the side door, the door wells going down when they were perfectly safe up there. They were heading right toward the zone of fire when they shouldn't have. People below the fire were doing the same thing. The firefighters in a fire in a high-rise go immediately to the floors above it and below it and get everybody out. The rest of the people can stay there because you can't empty a building in a short period of time when you've got 1,000 people in a short period of time. If you're in a home, you have to have a fire plan. You got to understand that that child on the second floor in a bedroom can get out his window and see if he can get out onto the garage top, or if you've got a ladder, can he use the ladder? Is there a storm window there that the child can't open? You have to tell the child, don't look for mom and daddy. If you hear the smoke detector, get out quickly, bend down low under the smoke, don't stand up, get low and get out immediately and go to the front of the building and wait at whatever the signpost, the stop sign, the tree, or whatever. Have a plan and practice it once a year. So it really depends on what you're doing. People get trapped in buildings because they rush into the hallway and lock themselves out, and the smoke thickens and they get asphyxiated. The Macaulay Calkins fire killed, I think, a couple of people who ran out into the hallway, locked themselves out, and were overcome for everybody. You have to prepare and say, what if there's a fire, for example, in an office building? Can I hide in the bathroom? No. You've got to get out in an office building, no matter what. Don't take an elevator, but you got to get out because there are partitions and fire and smoke spreads quickly. There's nothing to block it. If there's a fire in your own apartment, close the door and get out. Doors are made of metal. It'll keep the fire and smoke out. Hey, there are so many rules that you could teach people that are not taught.
Do firefighters know this?
It's anyone who's... Now, the only people who know the danger and how to get a fire and learn that are the firefighters themselves and the people who have been in a fire. You talk to somebody who's been in a real fire and gotten out, and as you talk to them, look at their eyes. They get that glazed look like, oh my God, that was the most frightening experience. So you've got to understand that, and you have to be taught that, and that's not what's been happening. Because way back when I was a young fella, Harry Truman said, we've got to do something about fire in this country. And he had a huge congregation and a convention of experts, and it came out that we got to do something. We've got the worst fire record in the world. More people die here and don't understand fire, and we have to do something. And nothing was done.
It's a fascinating problem, and we need to fix it, and I'm glad you're bringing attention to it. Dr. Field, I want to hit you with some rapid-fire questions here. First thing that comes to your mind, highlight of this career, the one moment you like the best.
You know, it's like handing me a box of candy and saying, which one of these chocolates are your favorite? I eat them all. It's which one are the best? I think one of the most exciting events that every now and again comes back to me, aside from the Heimlich, when we did the live kidney transplant. Nothing like that had ever been done. The news director didn't want to do it, but he was convinced to do it by one of the executives running WNBC then. And he predicted it would be a disaster. He was dead wrong, because we followed the procedure. They kept coming back to me, and by the time we opened up at 5 o'clock with me in an empty operating room with nurses around me preparing the place, and with Chuck Scarborough, who, by the way, by 2014 is still working up in New York, I understand, with Chuck Scarborough saying, we're going to be going to Frank Field, who is in the operating room at Dowden State University, where a African-American mother is about to give her African-American daughter a kidney transplant, and we will follow it closely. And there's a reason behind it, because thousands of people are dying because they can't get a kidney transplant. And people are dying and leaving their transplants to wither. So we're doing that tonight, and here's Frank, and I did an introduction. He said, I will be going from that room where the mother is, and a cameraman carrying this huge camera, weighed a ton, and me pulling the cable. pulling ahead. He followed me into the room where the mother was going to be and into the room where the daughter was going to be. And that's what we will do. And in fact, we went to the studio to carry on. And every 15 minutes or so, maybe less, I would get on the mic and say, they're about to take the kidney out of the patient. Come to us in a minute. And they'd say, now we have to cut away because they're about to take, and we followed that procedure. And the newspapers, all over every television station in the city, and I guess every radio station could not believe what they were seeing. They could see the clocks in the operating room, and it was real time. We were doing it live. The name of the doctor was Kuntz, K-O-U-N-T-Z. He was an African-American, too. He picked up the kidney out of the woman's body, and he said to the other surgeon, you can sew up now, put it into a bucket of ice, and he carried it down the hallway with me trailing him, talking to me, saying, now the kidney has turned white, as you can see. Once we put it into the body, it'll change to red. And we walked down into the room he went with. The other team was standing around. And at that point, I go to the side. He starts doing his operation, and he's doing play-by-play for about 5 minutes. And he says, now it's going to take about 8 or 9 minutes for this thing to start warming up. And we go back to the studio, and the studio was, everybody in the studio was staring, couldn't believe it. It was a blockbuster. You could not believe what was going on. It was a live kidney transplant seen during the dinner hour. There were some critics who said, I couldn't have my dinner. I was eating my dinner, and there's this guy up there pulling a kidney out of somebody. But it was just the greatest 1 hour, 2 hours that the thing that to me highlighted it is when I met people from other studios, other stations, they'd all come up and say, hey, last month or last 6 months ago or last year when you did that kidney transplant, we were watching your show in a control room. We almost forgot what the hell we were doing because we couldn't believe what the hell you were doing. And it was just one of the things that helped me grow. It was just what I'm thinking. You got me back there again. You shouldn't do this to an old man. He might not be able to take it. But it really worked.
It's a one-of-a-kind moment. And with all of these box of chocolates in your career, Dr. Field, what was the low? What was the moment you disliked the most?
I really was unhappy leaving what I thought was my home, and that was NBC. Because I lived in Midtown, I could walk just literally 3 blocks to work. If I had to be on a show at 8 o'clock in the morning, not for women only, I would listen to traffic reports at 7:30 while I'm in the shower, and a half hour later, I'm in the studio. Leaving NBC really was a tough thing, but that's what happens in the business. You take it as it comes. I think that was one of the points where I was ready to chuck it all. But it worked out fine because then I got the opportunity at CBS to do a lot of things I never would have been permitted to do, like the Fire series. That Fire series I did at CBS got 6 Emmys locally. We compiled it into a half hour, and we beat Johnny Carson, by the way, on the air one night. Luckily, Johnny was off. It was somebody else filling in for him. But that was a 20-part series. Have you ever heard of a TV station doing 20-part series?
That's almost unheard of.
Unheard of. It was then, but the general manager of the station bought into it when we said we're going to save children's lives, and it's something that we've got to do. And I got the fire commissioner to let me go to the fires. We got the Daily News in New York City promoted the hell out of it and had a reporter go with me, and he wrote up his version of what we were doing. We got McDonald's giving away 5,000 smoke detectors. everybody worked together, and McDonald's put out 2 million tray liners promoting fire safety on WCBS every day for 2 weeks. So it was really an amazing compilation of information backed up by people who were dedicated to help us. And it also turned into a book that I had to write on fire safety way back then. So there were so many things in 50 years. I could ramble on forever, but in those days, the bloopers and other things that you never gotten saved, you know, I was on the Johnny Carson show before we signed a contract where he got possession of all the shows that he owns, and you see it now promoted on television. I was the only one that had my appearances. For example, I was on with Clint Eastwood on one show that I remember. He was a young kid then. And so when we were on there, all those were erased. I was the only one who still has, no, I shouldn't say I'm the only one now, but I was the only one who had the kinescopes that the crew saved for me.
Wow.
The guy said, you were on, they knew. And whenever Frank goes on a Carson show, clip the kinescope, set it aside, don't let them erase it, and give it to Frank. And I had an office full of kinescopes, and I shipped them all to the West Coast. It was about 5 years before, 5 or 6 years before Johnny died, because they never had those. I don't know what's become of them, but they're out there somewhere. And I have them.
You have them. That's what's most important. You have to send me those. I'd like to see them.
You want to see them?
I'd like to see them.
All right, one of these days I will. I saved them for my kids, my great-grandchildren, because they're very cool about this. My grandson said to me, he was 7 or 8, he said, somebody said you were on TV, eh? And I said, yeah, I used to do that. What did you do? I said, I gave weather reports. He started to laugh. Come on, tell me the truth. Were you really on TV? I said, yeah, I was in the animated cartoons, kid. And he said, which ones?
I have to ask you this. Everybody knows Willard Scott. Everybody knows Al Roker. Every newscast has a weatherman or meteorologist, however they refer to themselves. If you're teaching the class today, people still want to do it. They want to be the weather person. What makes a good meteorologist?
Well, you have to have a background, but I don't think, I think meteorology is a specialty. If you enjoy doing it, go ahead and do it. But I found it pretty repetitive. I have a science background, and with a science background, it gets boring. There's no challenge to it. And now, it was a challenge then to try to do the weather because we have very few instruments to do it by. We lost a hurricane in the middle of the Atlantic in my early days in television. I kept saying it was over here when it wasn't. Because the only way we knew there was a hurricane out there was from ship reports. You get 3 or 4 ocean liners reporting in saying the wind is 70 knots from the northeast, and another ship would say the wind is, report directly by radio, the wind is out of the southwest at 110 knots, and you would build a circle and say the storm is somewhere near maybe 1,000 miles south of Bermuda. That was the only way we knew it. There were no satellites. Today you see a satellite, with satellites you see the storm born, you can track it second by minute. You can have aircraft fly into it and tell you where it is. So now it's a game. Is that bowling ball going to hit the middle pin or the left pin? And you're still having a little bit of a difficult time pinpointing the accuracy, but at least you now have some scientific instruments, so there's no challenge as much. There still is a challenge because meteorology is a challenge. But in those days, it was really a hazard to try to predict where a hurricane was because you didn't know. And, we had a hurricane that we said was at a certain point, and it showed up at another point a day later, causing all kinds of damage. And the question was, why didn't you know it was out there? Well, we didn't know because we had no data, nothing to go by.
From the man who never went to broadcast school, who spent 50 years in it, what makes a good broadcaster?
Well, drive, intelligence, are willing to know what you don't know, don't fake it. It's obvious sometimes well, maybe I'm unique in that way. I watch a broadcaster who ends up in some country where he's never been before, doesn't speak the language, and I'm saying, what the hell is he doing there? I mean, what was the purpose of sending him there? Because our news reporters there, you've got locals who speak English, use them. And that's what they're beginning to do because it's more economical. In my day, they'd send the anchorman out there. For what reason?
Yeah.
I mean, he's not going to report anything. He's never been there, and he doesn't know the climate. He doesn't know the politics. Somebody's going to write it for him. So don't become the answer all, you know. It's like dealing with doctors. One of the problems I had, well, the only problem I had really in talking to doctors in 500 or 600 half-hour programs to tell them, if I have a stupid question that you can't answer because it's not it's not your field, just say, I can't answer that. I'm a neurologist. I'm not a pediatrician, so I don't know. And you can flake me for that, but doctors, you get a doctor on the air, some of these guys, and particularly in local stations, you got a guy, because he's an MD, is telling you about brain surgery or some other aspect that he doesn't know anything about. And he's giving you the wrong information. So when I used to do the half hours, I'd say, you're the knowledgeable guy. If you say the endothelial tissue sloughs off here, I'm going to stop you and say, what's endothelial tissue? You got to speak at show and tell, and you're talking. You can't get low enough at a level of intelligence to overdo it. It's got to be clear and precise and knowing. And so the reporters have to, you know, Frank McGee and some of the other key people never got out of college, and yet have terrific intelligence by reading. In fact, we have, who's the young fellow now I worked with at CBS? He's now the anchor at NBC.
Brian Williams?
Brian Williams, yeah. Brian Williams is a young reporter at CBS when I was there. And he's very bright. He didn't go to any named colleges. He didn't go to, I don't think he went to communication school. He went to a community college. But he's an avaricious reader. He has the talent to ad-lib and speak. And way back then, we thought he was the best up-and-coming guy at CBS. And NBC stole him away because some executive of CBS didn't think he was anchor quality, which is the funniest story I ever heard.
Now here's the big question, Frank. 91 years old, yes, coming up on 91, but we are in the internet age. You're in Florida. I'm in Ohio right now. We're talking to each other. I can see you. You sound great. You look great. If somebody said, Frank, you don't have to come to an office, don't have to be here 8 hours a day, but we want you to do something. We want you to tape something. We want you to come in every so often. Would you come back?
I don't think so. I'm having too much fun and getting more feedback doing what I do now in fire safety and other public areas that I feel I should pay back. It's something I feel I should be doing. On occasion, if it were fire safety and I knew it promoted, I would love it. If Mr. Anchorman on CBS or NBC said, let's get this 91-year-old guy on the air to talk about fire safety with video and so on, we could do a blockbuster and probably save thousands of lives. But between you and I, it ain't going to happen.
Well, let's say this, Frank. Certainly fire safety, very important. Science, very important in general. But next to your name, it's always going to be meteorology, I think. Weatherman. Would you do a forecast?
No.
Never. That's
boring. It's boring.
Frank, 100 years from now, because I think you got a lot of time left, but you made it into the mainstream in your career. Johnny Carson, Tom Snyder, a lot of great things. What's the epitaph going to read?
He got paid for doing what he loved.
Can't say anything better than that.
Oh, that was, you know, every now and again, I'll walk through a mall with Mrs. Field, and somebody will stop me, and it's generally the elder generation, and say, you know who you look like? And I'll say, no. And they'll say, you look like the guy I grew up with and I watched for years in New York, Dr. Frank Field. And I'll say to them, yeah, that's who I am. And they'll say to me, no, you're not. And I say, I have to pull out my driver's license. They say, here's my driver's license, you son of a gun.
Go ahead.
It happens. You know, it does happen that way. I get a kick out of it, but Mrs. Field doesn't.
Do you still have the trench coat and hat? Could you be ready in a second?
No, I left that up north where the temperature today, I think, I spoke to my kids, was about 10 degrees above zero, and I'm down here in Florida with chilly 50s and 60s.
It must be terrible being down there in Florida right now when that weather's going on.
And all my kids are calling me saying, oh, can we come down there?
Well, for this sake, Frank, it's weird that we're talking because the Northeast did get hit with a nastier than normal storm temperature-wise this week as we're doing this. We were 15 below here in Ohio. That's unheard of. New York, same type of thing. Frank, what should people know about weather like this for your old audience up there?
Well, by now, if they're old, they've learned how to deal with it. That's my end. If they haven't, they're not around now to deal with it. But I think what's happening now, the good part about weather forecasting now is because the technology has developed so rapidly with the satellites and with all the materials we have, we get much better forecasts these days. The Weather Channel and most of the local people depend on the Weather Bureau or the Weather Channel or other weather professional weather sources. The accuracy has increased a great deal, but long-range weather forecasting, sometimes people just annoy the hell out of me because they tell me they got the Farmer's Almanac and they know the weather for 4 months down the road. And I tell them, well, you didn't have to buy the Farmer's Almanac. I could have told you, what day do you want? And they'll say, well, I've got a big party in February, 2 months from now on the 11th, my kid's graduating, whatever it is. What's the weather going to be? And I said to him, it's going to be very cold, and there's a chance of snow flurries, and walk away. And by God, you know, I meet them later on, and say, you were right, it was cold, and there were snow flurries when my kid, come on.
100% accuracy.
100% accuracy.
Frank,
doesn't exist.
When a storm comes in your old stomping grounds in New York, or down there in Florida, when a big storm rolls in, do you look it up? Do you look on the internet? Do you care at all anymore?
Oh, yeah. No.
Okay.
I generally, living in Florida and right smack on the ocean, if I pull the drapes here, the beach is below me and the Atlantic is off to the east. I generally get up and throw the windows open, look off and say, well, southeast wind, nice swell on the ocean, no problem. If I see it's cloudy and I want to go out, I just use my iPad, my iPhone, or my laptop and check the radar and say, yep, there's showers and they're moving down from, let's say, West Palm heading here, so I got 20 minutes to get out and pick up the goodies at the store and get back. So it's, but weather as a whole, you know, 50 years of it, I'm not a weather geek anymore. I really am interested in lots of other things.
So the old adage that weathermen never retire isn't true with Dr. Frank Field.
No, I retired. I'm now a firefighter.
What was that joke? It was weathermen never retire, darn it.
No, there was another one. There was a better one that said, I forgot the rhyme. It was a double line doggerel. It was, you never forget the weatherman's failure. I forgot it. It was way back 50 years ago when I had it over my desk right on the wall.
Frank, I have to tell you, this has been very fun for me. I enjoy going back in memory lane.
It really took you a long time to get to. You've been bugging me now for what? Almost a year?
You're very hard to get to.
No, I'm easy to get to, but
Easy,
I'm
hard to convince.
I'm a self-effacing guy. I don't want the publicity. I've had a great career, and you know, when you asked me earlier about Johnny Carson, my God, I don't know how he survived. He couldn't walk on the street or go anywhere. Privacy is totally it's non-existent for somebody like that. And when I was at the peak of my working days, when I was both science and health and Carson and Snyder, Mrs. Field wouldn't walk with me on the street. She'd walk 20 feet ahead because somebody'd stop me for an autograph. And while I'm signing it, I look up, my wife is now 2 blocks up 6th Avenue. Well, I say, why didn't you wait? I'm not waiting.
Well, now, a year after my convincing, it wasn't so bad, was it?
Well, you know, I got to get to the bathroom. If you don't stop, let me. I'm going to just get it. You know, we old timers are. I'm a frequent flyer and a frequent peer.
Well,
and so you better let me go now, or you'll be sorry.
That's the best way to end. Dr. Frank Field, thank you so much for coming on.
Have a good one.
Dr. Frank Field, certainly one of a kind, and to see that old Tonight Show footage, Kinescope from the 1960s, where else you going to see that except right here on Scott Spears Now? I certainly hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I certainly hope you'll come back in the future. Remember, you can get episodes like this on the internet by going to Facebook, searching Scott Spears Now and clicking like, or going to YouTube and doing the same, typing in Scott Spears Now. We move on from here. The weather out there hopefully will be getting warmer before too much longer. But for now, I gotta get out of here. So this is Scott Spears for this episode of Scott Spears Now, heading for the dugout.